Norway has a coastline longer than twice the circumference of the Earth. That number shouldn't be possible for a country this size. But the coastline doesn't run straight. It fractures into fjords, islands, and narrow channels of ink-dark tidal water that moves faster than it looks. You can drive for an hour and cross a dozen of these interruptions. The country holds fewer than 6 million people across land larger than Germany. It sits at the top of nearly every quality of life measure on the planet. The terrain is demanding. The winters are long. The distances are, in many places, measured in ferry schedules rather than minutes. And yet, the system works. Not tolerably, comprehensively. That may be the real story here. Not the scenery, but the fact that a place this difficult somehow learned how to function this well, and kept it up generation after generation in conditions that should have made it harder. There is no single reason, no one policy, one resource, one inherited value. It took centuries, and it still requires a particular kind of attention. Quiet, deliberately unremarkable, easy to miss if you are looking for something larger. You notice it first in how people occupy space. Doors close without a slam. On a city street, the loudest sounds are usually mechanical. A sliding tram, a bicycle freewheel, air releasing from a bus door. A child crosses a wet sidewalk, and the sound dissolves before it forms. A man waits at an intersection with his hands loose at his sides, looking at nothing urgent. The space between people feels maintained without being performed. Nature here doesn't announce itself. The forest starts where the sidewalk ends, with almost no transition. A gas station, a 2-second gap, then the tree line. Weather moves through fast, iron gray to shimmering silver, a quick rain deepening the stone, then a gap in the clouds that turns every window into a mirror. The temperature drops before the rain arrives. You feel the shift before you see it. Malachite green moss covers the base of the rocks without ceremony. Pale lichen spreads across surfaces that have been standing longer than the path beside them. Here, the silence never cancels the scale. Somehow, the two stay in the frame together. That is what this video is about. Norway found oil in the North Sea in 1969. Most countries that find oil spend it. Norway did something different. It saved it. The fund created to hold that wealth now stands at over $2 trillion. The government draws a controlled percentage each year for the national budget, and the rest stays invested abroad. The architects of the fund decided early that pouring oil money directly into the domestic economy would inflate it, distort it, make it dependent on something that would eventually run out. So they built a separation between the oil and the everyday. That decision held. It is still holding. The fund has its own ethics rules. No tobacco, no cluster munitions, no coal operations past a certain threshold. It votes at shareholder meetings around the world, and when it does, boardrooms pay attention. Norway built its fortune from fossil fuels and then spent decades deciding, carefully and publicly, what that fortune should and shouldn't touch. That is one part of the picture. Here is another. At a supermarket car park outside Bergen, charging cables hang in loops from low posts. A car sits quietly in the silver-gray rain. No engine sound, no exhaust. A woman adjusts her collar and walks inside. The wet asphalt reflects a smear of pale white light. Nothing marks the moment as remarkable. But in 2025, nearly 96% of new cars sold in Norway were fully electric. Not through sudden conversion, through 20 years of consistent policy. Tax incentives on electric cars, penalties on petrol ones, charging infrastructure built before demand fully arrived. The electricity powering those cars comes from water. Norway generates almost all of its electricity from rivers and reservoirs. The same mountains that make roads expensive and farming difficult also hold water high above the towns. That water comes down through rock and valley, and most of the country runs on it. So the picture is this: oil wealth saved, a domestic economy powered almost entirely by rivers, and a transport fleet converting to electric faster than anywhere on Earth. None of it happened by accident. All of it required policy that held across decades, across governments, across arguments that could have gone differently. Norway also has a king penguin named Sir Niels Olav, holding an official rank in the Royal Guard. He has been promoted more than once. The paperwork exists. The penguin looks thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. Oslo doesn't introduce itself with height. It introduces itself with access. The Opera House roof is open to the public, not as a viewing platform with a ticket desk and a rope barrier. Open, the way a street is open. People walk across its white marble surface, worn to a faint sheen by weather and foot traffic, on the way to somewhere else. The building costs a lot and sits in the middle of the city and lets everyone use it. The city treats this as unremarkable. That is worth paying attention to. Akershus Fortress rises above the harbor with gray stone that looks like it never needed to impress anyone. Moss fills the joints. The surface hasn't been restored to look new. It looks like something that held its ground without requiring attention. From the walls, the city reads as measured. Water, low skyline, edges that stay clean even in gray light. You feel something about Oslo before you can name it. It is something about how public life runs without friction. The tram arrives and people board without scrambling. A school group crosses a wide pedestrian path and nobody has to navigate around anyone. The path is simply wide enough. The trust that makes that possible isn't visible in any single moment. It's in the fact that the moment works at all. Norway consistently ranks at the top of global indices for institutional trust and low corruption. But what those numbers actually point to is simpler. Hospitals that function, schools that serve every income level, public institutions that do what they say they do over long periods of time. When Norwegians describe trust in government, they are usually describing an experience, not an idea. 2 buildings in Oslo make this unusually concrete. The Nobel Peace Center holds the history of the prize not as a trophy collection, but as an archive, a record of human attempts to organize against violence across more than a century. And the Munch Museum, which opened in 2021 along the waterfront, holds over 26,000 works by Edvard Munch. He left nearly all of it to the city of Oslo in his will. The city spent decades deciding how to house it properly. The building that resulted is a 10-minute walk from the Opera House, the central station, and the ferry terminal. That placement wasn't incidental. Oslo doesn't explain Norway. It just lets you watch the system working. Before Christianity moved north through Scandinavia in the 10th and 11th centuries, the Norse organized their spiritual life around the landscape itself. The forest, the water, the places where weather arrived without warning. The buildings that emerged from that encounter with a new religion are unlike any other sacred architecture on Earth. Dark, layered, built from the densest timber the northern forests produced, shaped by engineering logic as much as by belief. Norway once had over 1,000 stave churches. Fewer than 30 survive. Bergen in the Lærdal Valley is the best preserved of all. Built in the late 1100s, standing without significant structural intervention for nearly 9 centuries. Some facts don't shrink into narration. This is one of them. The smell of aged tar and cold resin arrives before the building does. Up close, the grain of the wood is still legible, compressed tight rings of deep sepia and blackened amber, the kind that form when growing seasons are short and cold pushes nutrients into density rather than spread. Dragon head carvings sit at the ends of the ridgelines, worn to a smoke-darkened relief at the points where wind hits first. A fence rail runs the perimeter, spaced for function rather than symmetry. Nothing here looks decorative for decoration's sake. It reads like craft answering weather. Joinery, angles, layers, pressure, accumulated winters. Bergen makes more sense when you place it back inside medieval Norway. The country in that period was organized around small kingdoms, coastal trading routes, and the slow northward movement of an institution, the church, that was used to building in stone in warmer climates and had to learn what wood could do up here. Trondheim, farther north on the edge of its fjord, became the seat of Norwegian Christianity in a way that shaped the country for centuries. Nidaros Cathedral, built at the site of St. Olav's tomb, became the northernmost great cathedral of the medieval world. Pilgrims traveled routes through some of the most difficult terrain in Europe to reach it. Bergen was part of that same world, a local expression of the same impulse, translated into the material the forest offered. Inside, the light changes tempo. Openings are small. The room holds cool shadow and the smell of old timber. In summer, a thin line of amber light enters at a sharp angle and moves slowly across the age-darkened floor as the hour shifts. Wood settles with a faint sound. The outdoor world, wind through grass, a distant engine, birds in the afternoon, stays outside. A structure built for belief that also feels like engineering. The two things don't conflict here. They simply share the same blackened, centuries-worn wood, and have for 900 years. There is a Norwegian word, friluftsliv, that translates roughly as open-air life. It means something more than recreation. Being outside here is not an activity you schedule. It is closer to maintenance, something that weakens if avoided and strengthens with practice. Norwegian children spend significant portions of the school day outside, regardless of weather. Rain is not a reason to cancel. Cold isn't either. The legal structure behind this is called allemannsretten, the right to roam. Every person has the right to walk, camp, and move through uncultivated land in Norway, regardless of who owns it. No permit, no booking, no asking. You leave no trace and respect the land, and in return, the land is yours to move through. It's not wilderness access in the designated trail sense. It belongs to whoever is standing on Norwegian ground. At Helleran, 2 small farmhouses sit under a vast, smoke-gray rock overhang, as if the mountain offered a roof, and the people accepted without overthinking it. The walls of the houses are modest. The rock does the real work. Wind drops under the stone. Water drips slowly from the lip of the overhang, darkening the earth below to deep umber, a strip of ground that never fully dries. Tiny human scale pressed under geology, wood grain against raw stone. Everyday life placed where the terrain already solved the problem. Then the route moves toward exposure. Preikestolen doesn't build suspense through design. It builds it through absence. No railings, no staged boundary. The path takes you through forest, then scrub, then open rock, the sky widening as the tree line drops away. By the time you reach the cliff edge, you have felt the change before you see the drop. People slow down without being told. Some stop a few meters back, not from fear exactly, but something more physical, a recalibration of what safe and not safe actually feel like in the body. On the plateau, 600 meters above the fjord, the surface is stable underfoot, and the space ahead is pure fall. Shadows from clouds move across the water below in slow, disconnected patterns. Breathing changes before thought does. The logic here feels different from most places. The danger stays visible. People are expected to read it for themselves. No barriers, not because the country is careless, but because that is simply where the responsibility sits in Norway. The country lets you stand at the edge. What you feel there is your own business. On a Norwegian map, roads often look unfinished. Then you realize the ferry is the road. Norway has more than 1,000 road tunnels and more than 100 ferry connections that form part of the official national road network. To drive from the south to the north along the coast, you board ferries not as a detour, but as a required step in the main route. The western coastline is too fragmented for a continuous land road, so the infrastructure made the water part of the journey. Tunnels go under fjords. Hairpin roads climb cliff faces where tunnels would cost too much. Ferries connect what roads cannot reach. The result looks, on a map, like it should not function, and moves people across one of the most demanding landscapes in Europe with daily reliability. Vestvegen climbs through 27 hairpin turns. The action repeats. Turn, correct, rise, until your sense of direction stops being about north and south and becomes entirely about up. Sheer rock walls, streaked with mineral white and moisture, compress sound into something close and hollow. A passenger looks out the window, then stops looking, finding some middle distance between the glass and the cliff. The guardrail appears and disappears. On some bends, where the drop is largest, it isn't there. Even inside the car, voices lower. Higher up, the landscape does things that don't look engineered. Kiragbulten sits wedged between two cliff faces above Lysefjord at roughly 1,000 meters. A boulder locked in place long enough that pale lichen has started spreading across part of its surface. The void beneath it is not theoretical. A person standing on it becomes one figure against a great deal of nothing. Trolltunga extends from a cliff face like a platform someone forgot to attach. The approach is 4 to 5 hours in reasonable conditions. Weather shifts during that walk. Clouds closing distance, sun sharpening every edge, rain making rock darker and more reflective. At the tongue itself, the scene is quiet. A narrow projection of stone, water far below, and a feeling that the landscape is simultaneously welcoming you and genuinely indifferent to whether you're here. In Norway, the route is strange because the land is strange. One explains the other. There is a version of Norway that most images skip. a valley floor where apple trees grow in organized rows following the hillside contour. White blossoms open in cold spring air, while snow still holds on the slopes above. The Hardanger region produces this, not because the climate is mild, but because the fjord moderates it just enough, reflecting water warmth upward, shielding the valley floor from the worst of the temperature swings. In the right season, pale petals collect at the base of the trunks. The light in the valley is soft and diffuse, held between the slopes. Alpine elevation and something agricultural, both in the same shot, neither one explaining the other. Then, water comes back as force. At Veringsfossen, sound arrives before the view, a deep, continuous roar that grows as the gorge tightens. Liquid crystal mist hangs where the water hits the rock below, and the walls show dark mineral streaks pulled down by water over centuries. Cold air, carrying the smell of wet stone and altitude, moves up from the base and reaches you before you see the drop. The waterfall falls roughly 180 meters. That number doesn't prepare you for the sound. Back toward the coast, Bergen becomes a city shaped by moisture. Cobblestone streets stay mirror bright, reflecting smeared amber and ochre from the painted facades above. Painted wood looks darker and richer wet. Deep mahogany, tarnished red, the color of something that has been weathered for a long time and knows it. Bergen is one of the rainiest cities in Europe. It is also, historically, one of the most commercially significant in Northern Europe. From the 14th century onward, it was a key trading post of the Hanseatic League, the merchant network that controlled much of the commerce moving between the Baltic, the North Sea, and the Atlantic coast. German merchants settled here, built warehouses directly on the harbor, and traded primarily in stockfish, cod air-dried on wooden racks in the cold Arctic wind. No salt, no refrigeration, only cold, dry air and time. It kept for years. It fed armies and populations across medieval Europe, and the trade route connecting Lofoten, where the cod arrived in vast seasonal migrations, to Bergen and then south, was one of the economic arteries of the medieval North Atlantic. That trade built Bergen into a city wealthy enough to develop the institutions and architecture that still define it. At Bergen, the time-worn wooden warehouse buildings face the harbor in tight alignment. Faded ochres, deep rusted reds, muted amber yellows. The same palette from the Hanseatic period, softened by centuries of salt air and Atlantic rain. The alleyways between them are narrow and dim, their depths running back from the waterfront like the gaps between organ pipes. Planks underfoot have been replaced in sections over the centuries, but the geometry holds. UNESCO listed Bergen in 1979, not because it is pristine, because it is continuous. People didn't settle in Norway's deepest fjords because the land was generous. They settled because the fjord gave them something the mountains couldn't: water access to the wider world, fish in quantities that made survival possible, and a seasonal rhythm that, if you learned it thoroughly enough, could be worked with. Norway Fjord narrows at points to around 250 meters across, with sheer walls of charcoal gray stone rising to over 1,700 meters on each side. It is one of the most enclosed landscapes in Europe. Bird calls echo from two cliff faces at once and return from directions that feel wrong. The water stays calm because the walls block the wind. Reflections are almost geometrically precise. Dark rock doubled in the surface, a vertical symmetry so complete it unsettles. A second look before the eye sorts real from mirror. Waterfalls fall as thin, liquid crystal threads from high fractures in the moss-darkened rock, meltwater finding the fastest line down. A single kayak crosses the frame and disappears, and the still, dark fjord closes behind it without a mark. Houses appear as small, pale interruptions on narrow shelves of flat ground, placed wherever the rock permitted. A boat tied to a dock. A single amber light on in a window at midday, the only warm color in the whole frame. The communities that stayed in these fjords built knowledge of how to stay, knowledge of the water, the fish runs, the weather patterns that came through each valley differently. That knowledge accumulated across generations and became, in places like Norway Fjord, as specific and irreplaceable as the landscape itself. Some of those families are still there. The Flom Railway climbs through 20 tunnels, switching between darkness and sudden open views. Cliff, waterfall, green valley floor, shadow, in a rhythm the landscape controls rather than the train. For drivers, the Lærdal Tunnel offers a different version of the same logic. At 24.5 kilometers, it is the longest road tunnel in the world. Long enough to become its own environment, its own temperature, its own air, its own sense of duration. The designers broke the monotony with color shift lighting zones at intervals, resetting the sense of progress without shortening the distance. The mountain above stays untouched. The route passes through without leaving a mark on the surface. The wild stays wild. The road finds its way under it. On the night of January 23, 1904, a fire broke out in a herring oil factory in Ålesund. By dawn, most of the city was gone. 10,000 people made homeless. The wooden structures of the old town reduced to ash in a few hours. Kaiser Wilhelm II, who had spent several summers sailing Norwegian fjords, organized a relief effort and sent 4 warships with supplies within days. What followed was unusual. Rather than rebuilding quickly in whatever materials were available, the city decided to rebuild in stone, systematically, to a single architectural plan. Norwegian and European architects drafted designs in Art Nouveau, the dominant style of the period, and Ålesund was rebuilt almost entirely between 1904 and 1907. The result is a city with a degree of stylistic coherence that is rare in any context. Facades with curved lines, organic ornamental details, towers designed to survive Atlantic weather. Every building from the same brief, the same years, the same decision to make something specific out of what could have been makeshift. Walking through Ålesund today is walking through a city that decided, after catastrophe, to become beautiful on purpose. At Geirangerfjord, scale takes over again. Sheer cliffs rise straight from dark water. Snow holds above, while the fjord below stays cold and still. A cruise ship at anchor looks small, not because the ship is small, but because the walls make scale irrelevant. The Seven Sisters waterfall runs as multiple parallel streams, each finding its own path down, none fully matching the next. In high summer, all 7 run at volume. In drier periods, some thin to almost nothing, while others hold. You have to stay a while to get the full picture. Trollstigen stacks 11 hairpin bends into a slope steep enough that the gradient in places reaches 1 in 8. A roaring white waterfall runs alongside the upper section, close enough that cold mist and spray reach the road in certain winds, silvering the tarmac. This is not a flaw in the design. It is the design acknowledging where it is. Then, the Atlantic Ocean Road. Just over 8 kilometers, crossing small rocky islands on bridges that dip and curve close to the gray-green water surface. In rough weather, cold Atlantic spray crosses the roadway in sheets. Dark waves break against the pilings with a force that vibrates through the structure. Construction workers called it the Road of the Century. In a storm, the century pushes back. Norway doesn't conquer its weather. It builds into it, around it, occasionally through it, and the negotiation never fully settles. The Sami have been in the far north for thousands of years, not as arrivals who adapted, but as people for whom this landscape is the original reference point, the thing all other knowledge is organized around. The Sami language family carries vocabulary for snow conditions, reindeer behavior, weather patterns, and terrain features that simply doesn't exist in Norwegian because Norwegian never needed it. The precision is practical. On the Arctic plateau in winter, the difference between two types of ice crust determines whether a reindeer herd can feed or will starve. Reindeer herding is tied specifically to Sami culture under Norwegian law. The semi-nomadic seasonal migrations, coastal winter pastures to high mountain summer pastures and back, across hundreds of kilometers each year, still happen. The knowledge required to move a herd through that terrain in that climate is held in specific families, accumulated across generations. It is one of the least visible and most sophisticated bodies of practical knowledge in Norway. In Lofoten, work becomes a winter landscape. Age-darkened wooden racks line the shore, and cod hangs in long rows, split, open to cold air and wind, drying slowly. The winter light arrives low and lateral, hitting the hanging fish at an angle that shifts the color between deep amber and pale gold as clouds move. The fishing villages sit tight to the water because access matters more than aesthetics. Deep, ochre-red buildings against ink-dark sea, ivory-peaked mountains behind, low light stretching long shadows across snow and rock, intensely cinematic and entirely functional. Neither one apologizes for the other. Above the Arctic Circle, light becomes the calendar. In summer, the sun doesn't set for weeks. The midnight sun sits at the horizon at 2 in the morning, casting a long orange light across water that never goes dark. Sleep patterns change. Time loses its usual anchors. And in winter, the polar night. Weeks of continuous darkness above the Arctic Circle, the sun either absent or barely clearing the horizon for a few minutes at noon. People build their year around this. They always have. Near Tromsø, the aurora appears without announcement. A faint arc. Then it intensifies. Green most often, threads of deep violet sometimes, shifting silently across a sky so dark it reads as absolute. Cold air sharpens sound. Breath rises and dissolves in the white beam of a headlamp while the sky moves. No soundtrack, no commentary, just cold and dark, and something moving overhead that has nothing to do with you. And then, Svalbard, halfway between the Norwegian mainland and the North Pole. Permafrost keeps buildings low and functional. Outside the settlements, polar bears outnumber people. Near Longyearbyen, Set into a frost-pale hillside above the permafrost, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault holds copies of the world's crop genetic diversity. Over 1.3 million seed varieties from nearly every country on Earth. No visitors. No sign visible from a distance. Only the dim gleam of a single exterior light catching the falling snow. Just a concrete entrance, the color of gray ice, quietly keeping something the rest of the world decided it needed to keep somewhere safe. The rock has not moved in a very long time. In Norway, even abundance feels disciplined. The light stays up past midnight, a pale, liquid gold that lies flat on the water and refuses to leave. The ferries keep running. Somewhere far north, amber-dried cod hangs in the wind, and a school day starts in the deep blue-black dark. The country never stops being difficult. It just learned how to live inside difficulty without turning it into drama. If this journey moved you, subscribe. There's more of the world to see.